we have our secure AI track. And so we're going to bleed seamlessly into this track. Many of you here are interested in neuroscience and neurotech, and for those of you interested in AI and all the wonderful things we can enable by getting AI secure, safe, and working, this is the track for you. In the AI track, we have a Foresight Fellowship. We have an AI grants program in that track where we give out around $2 million per year for specifically work focused on AI security, automating safety research, multipolar beneficial game theory for multi-agent settings, and lastly, the Neurotech track. And we do a workshop annually. So the next one is going to be with Vitalik Buterin in Q1 in the Bay Area on DAC. Who here knows what DAC is? Defense Accelerationism, specifically for AI security. But for now, I'm really excited to hear from a very, very dear friend and collaborator, a fantastic person that's doing really exciting work in this space, specifically focused on how can AI actually help humans and us as a civilization get more intelligent over time. And that is Divya Siddarth, who's also my housemate. So Divya, if you are with us, oh, there you are. Please come up on stage. All right, off you go. Thank you so much for joining us, and the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. This room always feels like it has more people than it does have in it due to all the statues, but it is more full than I expected regardless. Okay, so these are pretty quick talks, and I'll go pretty quickly. I wanted to start out with why I started the Collective Intelligence Project as an organization, and one of our primary goals is to preserve kind of autonomy and agency in the age of AI. And so we thought that, this technology is accelerating pretty quickly. Seems unlikely that our collective intelligence capacities are accelerating at a commensurate rate. And this is a big problem, specifically for questions of human autonomy and agency and the ability to have, choice and decision-making capacity over what you want to see in the world. So that's kind of the core thing we're working on at CIP. And we believe that the acceleration of AI can help with actually solving this problem. One of the downstream effects of that premise is that you need to be able to make good, effective, decentralized decisions to preserve agency and autonomy. Why? Well, a lot of the path to authoritarianism or power concentration, et cetera, comes from it being easier to make effective decisions with a fewer number of actors involved, with less information that needs to be processed, less diverse inputs, et cetera. And so if we are not able to make effective decentralized decisions, we will make eventually ineffective centralized decisions, and I think that's a pretty common failure mode. And so a lot of our work, because we want to preserve human autonomy and agency, comes down to this. How do we make this thing that is really important easier to do? Right now, it's crucial, but it's very difficult. I live in a group house with Allison. We make decentralized decisions all the time, and I think that we could be better. And anyone who has ever tried to make decisions that are decentralized has run into many problems that can make this, at least in the short term, less effective. And in particular, for us, if we're thinking about really governing the future, we're really thinking about governing something that's complex and nuanced and requires technical expertise, obviously there's a real temptation to not make decentralized decisions because the subject matter is complicated. We run a lot of participatory processes, and it's very difficult to go around and ask people what they want from AI and have that response be really useful. So this effectiveness question is crucial. I think we will not solve the problem of agency if we don't get much better at improving our collective intelligence capacities. So what is collective intelligence? It's a little bit of a slippery word, and I've thought about it a lot, and it's still kind of a complicated definition. But there are a bunch of parts to it. I would say collective intelligence is kind of an emergent property that comes up when diverse entities, so diversity is really crucial, you need multiple sources of input, combine decentralized information, so inputs of any kind, and capabilities, to construct and coordinate towards emergent positive sum outcomes. So collective intelligence, as I'm talking about it now, can be a way to govern things, but neural nets are an example of collective intelligence. Animals can coordinate in a collectively intelligent way. There can be very many non-human forms of collective intelligence as well, but they do come down to these kinds of attributes. And so if we go back to our original question, how can collective intelligence keep pace with AI and use AI to keep pace with AI? These are the 4 pieces that I think that we are working on as an organization, but hopefully I know many of you are working on pieces of this, and many more of us, I think, need to be working on these kinds of questions. What are those 4 things? The first is getting more diverse inputs of various kinds. Right now, a lot of the signal that we get from people, from systems, is really muted. It's not granular enough. I mean, we still run countries on things like basic voting. We still ask very few people to input into things. And even when we think about more spot-specific things with AI, like evaluations or post-deployment evaluations, those inputs are rarely very diverse, right? We're doing shallow information gathering all the time, and we need to be doing much more consistent information gathering from many more sources. And I think that this is like one big piece to work on, and you can work on this separate from working on the other pieces. The second is around information processing capacity. And so, language models allow us to process much more information than we could before. And we should take advantage of this by building institutions that are built on top of processing massive amounts of qualitative data, because we can actually do that now. And we haven't done that yet, right? So I think there's a huge amount of work in increasing our information processing capacity. We have all these great diverse inputs. What do we get out of them? There is a lot of work in that space, and I know folks here are working on that. The third is scalable experimentation. So I think of institutions as almost still in their symbolic phase. If you think about the progression of AI, we went from symbolic AI to something more connectionist, right? And institutions are still very symbolic. We have to be extremely legible and minimal in the kinds of things that we can experiment with. Things have to be propagated through institutions by humans. All of these problems mean that it's very difficult to scalably experiment with collective intelligence at the human level often. We're not out here like creating thousands of new institutions, A/B testing them, seeing how they go, seeing how different decision-making processes play out. But as we get better at simulation, as we get better at ways to scalably experiment, we can actually use technology to experiment with collective intelligence in ways that we tend not to. Like our big institutional innovations are still very slow, and we could make those feedback loops a lot faster. Again, something we are running a few experiments on, but lots of great academic work happening in this kind of agent-based simulation piece of, can we actually experiment with CI in a way that we have been able to experiment with much faster turnarounds in building technology. And then the fourth thing, I unfortunately am not sure that technology is currently helping very much with, but it's a coordination piece, right? Incentive alignment, internalizing externalities. We've got our diverse inputs, we're processing them, we're experimenting quickly. We still need to be able to act on those inputs, and sometimes this comes down to political will. I spent a while at the UK government earlier this year trying to do institutional coordination for AI. It's really difficult, and I think a lot of that comes down to committing to making sure our work actually has impact. So this fourth one, I think, is on the path to actually making something out of this, but it's a lot harder to argue that AI is going to solve that problem. I will quickly run through some of the experiments we have run in trying to, access more diverse information, process that information better, and experiment. But these are just a few things. And really what I'm excited about is lots of these experiments running and many people analyzing the results to build towards better futures. So some of these things, we've done some work directly inputting, directly tying public input into model behavior. So some of that has been with companies like OpenAI and Anthropic in terms of gathering more diverse input from more people around specifically value-based questions. So things that we believe that people have firsthand kind of knowledge of, and then having them inform where models are going. Some of it has been more on the policy side. We did a very large-scale process ahead of Taiwan's election, talking to hundreds of thousands of people about deepfake detection. They were obviously being hit with a lot of misinformation, kind of building more decentralized approaches to detecting misinformation and stopping the spread of misinformation. So there are some things that are more on the functional side, and then some things that are a little bit more on the policy piece. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to keep going. And I will say just briefly, a lot of the work on diversity of inputs can look like going to different countries. We now run processes with 1,000 people around the world around every month or two. But a lot of that information gathering also should be more like sensors for collective intelligence. So in the way that we have sensors to understand different parts of how the environment functions, et cetera, we are looking at what it means to sense where collective energy is going. I think in terms of building better information processing systems, the bar is still on the floor in terms of how much we can use language models to better process all of the information we already have in so many different capacities, even things like standard of living or how corporations are run. Like, we have incredible amounts of text information that we aren't using to build better institutions. And then finally, continuous experimentation, which I've already discussed. So these are the things that not only are we working on, but I think that many people in this room can contribute to this agenda of collective intelligence by working on different pieces of this. And I am excited about Fora, where people who are working on these aspects can come together to actually experiment with better collective intelligence. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. Questions? Wow, all the way in the back. Ramsey, I think you can already start screaming it out and by projecting loudly.
Thanks, Allison. Thank you so much. This is completely fascinating, and I'll follow up with you later on this. If you imagine this world where that doesn't say institutional coordination, it says protocol coordination, what is that world shaped like? As we look at what's happened institutionally and how some of our institutions might be changing, or as people say, like, are we kind of exiting the, we might be exiting the like 20th century consensus, top-down, governments get involved in things kind of world towards something else. Talk to us about what this looks like as protocols and how protocols allow us to coordinate towards collective intelligence, not just institutions.
Okay, I'm going to reflect back the question briefly just to make sure. You're asking what does this look like if we think of protocol coordination instead of institutional coordination? Okay. It's actually a great question. I think I'm very much an institutionalist in many ways, and this is like not a common position, I think, in San Francisco, so I'm glad you asked. I do think that institutions themselves, what is an institution? Often an institution is kind of an amalgamation of protocols, right? Like language, in a way, is an institution. It's a way that we collectively coordinate around something that is somewhat decentralized but has centralized components to it. We have dictionaries, et cetera. And I think when I think of building better institutions, I'm not thinking, the New York Times or, colleges, but rather, how do you actually build out the structures that can continuously cooperate to achieve shared goals? And often you do need some staying power for that. So I think I would think of protocols as kind of feeding into what it means to build institutions. Often we need better protocols for institutions to live and die. I mean, I think this is a big problem with how we think about institutions now. But to me, a lot of the top three things are around feeding into better protocols for information processing, for input gathering, and the institution is kind of the execution arm of that. So how do you tie the feedback loop back to make sure that your protocol information structures are having an impact on society? So I think basically thinking of an institution as a knot of protocols that has some staying power because there's lower transaction costs kind of maybe answers this question, but I'm happy to talk about it offline.
Thank you so much, Divya. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, awesome.